chatting.
Yeah. I guess it's a reasonably intimate session. So if those of you who are in the room right now, this session was meant to be more of like a back and forth interview as much as we can. So if you want to post on the chat or just take your microphone off and say hi, or if you're feeling brave, take your camera off, like just anything to let us know that you're there.
Yeah, it's quite strange talking to a screen. I think some people are still connecting actually. Hello, WL.
Hello.
Hi, WL.
So yeah, like there's not many of us, so you can just go ahead and go straight into asking any questions you have. This is pretty much personal service, and any of us can answer them. And I'm sure other people will have similar questions, so go ahead and ask anyone if they want to ask anything.
Yeah, we've got a PowerPoint of sort of the questions that came into us from the Google form, which we can go through as well, which might be some questions that you may be thinking of that other people asked. But if you guys that are here have any specific questions to start off with, then just please go ahead and ask.
I guess we can introduce ourselves again, by the way.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys have been to some of our previous webinars or watched them on YouTube to catch up, but I'm Serena.
I'm Ansi.
I'm Vig. And you might have caught Angela leaving because she has a night shift.
Yeah, I forgot I was at work, so sorry if I have to dash off at some point, but it's
Cool, yeah, so all of us are junior doctors. I don't know if you guys came to the last few webinars or watched them on YouTube or anything, but yeah, all of us are junior doctors, and this is week 4 of our sort of how to get an AFP course. This is the sort of last introduction week, I guess, to sort of the AFP stuff before we start doing the more like hardcore interview prep content. And sort of the overview of the next however long we're here for is just going to be going through some FAQs and questions that we've had over the last few weeks, which for those of you that were here for the last ones, must reiterate some things, and for those of you that weren't, might give you an idea about what we talked about. At any point, if you have questions, just take off your microphone and ask. Feel free to do that, or just post on the group and someone will respond. Okay, I'm just trying to open the chat to see. Okay, fine, no one's asked anything yet. Okay, fine, so I'll just start going through some questions. So I'll start off with some general FAQs. So the first one is, I don't have much research experience, should I still apply? The short answer is yes. Obviously, all this sort of research, teaching and leadership experience is useful, but the idea of the AFP is that it's an introduction to all these skills. So you'll actually develop a lot of the skills in it. A lot of the people that are doing AFPs might not have experience in each of these fields, but actually when you're on the job, you'll learn a lot of these things. The main thing that I would sort of reiterate at this point is that people often think they need to have very tangible experiences or things that count as points that will qualify for the AFP applications. One good experience of you doing something, so one good bedside teaching, one good seminar that you've delivered, or one society that you've been a part of, etc. That isn't necessarily tangible. You might not have a certificate for it or something like that, but that you can reflect upon, that you can show what you learned, and you can show how that inspired you to do the AFP, and how you want to build on that by doing an AFP. That's sort of the key things that people will look at and that you should be getting across in the structure of your white space questions. There are some deaneries that put an emphasis on actually having experience and might rank you in terms of points. But like I said, most people don't have all 3 of these things, if even one of these things. So don't be too worried about the point system, etc. I think I showed a stat on a chat weeks ago about sort of publications and stuff. And I think it was less than 100 people, maybe like 40 people actually had 2 publications when they applied, and about 100 had 1 publication. And that's not just for the AFP, that's for everyone, all final years in the UK applying to the foundation program. So it sort of puts things in perspective, hopefully. Anyone else want to say anything?
Yeah, I'd just say, like, again, if you guys watch the white space question one, I put most of the emphasis on the reflection part of things. And that applies for your interview as well. So what did you learn and what will you take forward with you? As long as you can reflect quite coherently, then you'll definitely be bringing some value to the AFP. So definitely make that the biggest part of your question, biggest part of your answers in terms of when you start writing your white spaces.
Cool. Yeah. So a common question that we got was what happens to your foundation program application? So you still apply for this alongside, you apply at the same time. So usually when you go on Oriel, and hopefully you'll have heard of Oriel by now, it's the online application system. When you go on there, you put in your foundation program choices first, and then you do your academic foundation program choices. You go through the application process for both. If you get an AFP offer and you accept it, you're removed from the foundation process. So you'll, whatever deanery choices, wherever you applied for that, you'll no longer be eligible for those. You'll have accepted your AFP job. If you don't get an offer or you reject the AFP offer, you'll remain in the foundation program process, and you'll still remain AFP process for any other deanery that you applied to as well, providing you weren't rejected from them outright. The AFP outcome has sort of no advert on your foundation program application at all. So someone asked, oh, I'm applying to deanery X and Y for AFP and Y and Z for foundation program. Will the outcome of the sort of deanery that I've applied to both for have an effect? Not at all. So your AFP application process is completely separate. So have any effect. They won't even know what happened, whether you got an offer or not. Is this the only route into academia? No. So all of the things that we mentioned in our previous talks, in terms of research, teaching, leadership, you can do alongside a normal foundation program as well. You don't need to have an academic foundation program to do it. It's just that, number one, you get protected time, which is super important. You get either 4 months off or 2 days a week to develop these skills. And it's much more difficult to do that when you're on a rota day-to-day, working weekends, nights, etc. When actually I'm on a 9-to-5 job where all I do is develop these skills all day. And the second thing is that you have appropriate supervision. So all your supervisors are people that have signed up to tutor you, to mentor you, and to give you an introduction into academia. So they're all people that are passionate about that and that can help you a lot in that sort of level. So that's sort of the advantage of the AFP over foundation program in terms of experience of academia. You can enter into academic training higher up in the process as well. So in our first week, we talked about the academic pathway. So Marinos is currently an academic clinical fellow in ACF. And so it means that after you finish your initial years of training, like your foundation program or your core surgical or your IMT training, your medical training, you can then apply for similar posts. What component of your time will be just for academic work, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Has anyone got any questions so far?
Yeah, any questions? Anything?
If this is not what you want to, if these are not your questions that you want answers to, then
yeah,
let us
know, and we'll just skip. We're only going through this because no one's said anything, so just let us know what specific questions you want us to skip to.
Did anyone here submit any questions on the Google Forms? Oh, we've just got a question come in.
Okay, so how much research experience do you get on a MedEd AFP? So that's a good question. So a lot of so Serena and I are both medical education AFPs. I'm currently on my AFP blog. In terms of actual research experience, you get to do definitely education projects. So a lot of these things, so on the undergraduate side, they'll be guided by the feedback of students, or you've recently been a medical student, so you know sort of initiatives or areas that might be gaps in the undergraduate curriculum, and you'll get to develop your own content with your supervisor to then slot into the undergraduate curriculum or deliver your own teaching program and turn that into a project. In terms of and that can be done on the postgraduate side as well. And the unique thing about a MedEd AFP is that you get to do that in very new environments. So I'm doing a simulation teaching project, and that wasn't something that I'd had a lot of experience in when I was a medical student. So I've been facilitating simulation. I've come up with my own simulation program, and then I've turned that into a project in finding a sort of niche new area of simulation. Another example of a research project is sort of recording. So students aren't allowed to go into theatre right now. So one of my projects is recording aspects of surgery, packaging it into an online module and turning that into a project to see how students find that. The other point I want to make is that just because you're doing a MedEd AFP doesn't mean you need to do a MedEd project. Ideally, your supervisor will encourage you to do something like that. But actually, the vast majority of my time so far, I've spent on doing non-MedEd projects. So I'm interested in surgery. So I've just been working with the surgical team here. And my supervisor was the one who actually put me in touch with the surgeons in this hospital that she knew about. And so I've been doing non-medical education projects alongside the medical education ones as well. It's just that I have the time to do it now. So actually it's great.
Yeah, I would say, so it says, how much research experience do you get? As far as EBH, you're not going to get anything. No one's saying, here is a project waiting for you. There's not really any supervisor saying, here I am ready to supervise you. So if I don't know where you're applying, perhaps you can say, just so we can tailor the answer a bit. But at EBH, there's not really anything coming to you, like any pre-made projects. It's your time and you can do what you want with it. If I choose to make contacts with people heavily into MedEd, say I'm interested, then I can get involved with projects with them. Similar to Vignesh, if I want to concentrate on my portfolio for higher training, like surgical training, I can get in touch with, so I've got the time now to get in touch with the surgeons who are into academia and get involved with projects on them, with them. No one's really, lining up projects like pick one and you can do it. It's more about being very proactive, but that's just the nature of EBH. So you can make what you want of it is the simple answer if you're applying here. So you'll get as much research experience as you look for.
Yeah.
So it's very much guided by you.
Definitely. I think that's the thing with the AFP block. I think you can make out of it as much as you really want to make out of it. So if you don't want to do anything and really chill and stuff, you can chill. If you want to do many projects, it's really up to you. You can run 2-3 projects alongside to each other, and then it really how much you want to get out of this block yourself. So it's really what you make out of it.
Mm-hmm. Hope that answers. So send any more questions if you think of them. Yeah. Otherwise, we can carry on with some FAQs, but we'll prioritize your questions if you ask them specifically on the chat or on the audio. Okay?
Yeah. Like the only other thing I had to add to that, actually, I just remembered is I'd never really done a huge amount of MedEd research stuff before, but a lot of the things that you do in like clinical research overlaps a lot with MedEd. So you actually still do sometimes write funding applications, you still do write project proposals, you still have to write ethics sometimes. So you still get a lot of that even with MedEd projects. And so I've done some of that stuff for the first time on this block. Which has been really interesting. And again, it's not necessarily a tangible outcome. I don't necessarily have a publication right now because of that, but it's all things that I'd never done before that now I know how to do and I've had a bit of experience and guidance in.
No, yeah, you definitely like gain skills and stuff. Yeah, I've never.
Cool. Fine. I'm just going to keep going with the slides until someone interrupts me and asks me anyone else another specific question. Okay, will I lose out on clinical experience? Technically, you will. So like I mentioned, I'm on a 4-month AFP block, and normally how it works is that in a foundation program, you have 6 4-month blocks across the F1 and F2 year. The way it works in most deaneries is that you take out one of those clinical blocks and you slot in an academic block, so you lose that clinical placement. In EBH or some other deaneries, you get what's called day release. So Serena's got 2 days a week, so Thursday and Friday off, which again means less clinical time. And it means that you end up doing 2 placements again in the F2 year. So technically you will lose clinical experience. You still have to complete all the same requirements as every other foundation doctor, but I wouldn't worry about that at all. It's reasonably easy to do. There aren't many requirements. You just need to do like 5 clinical examination supervision things, and you can, if you're motivated, do that all within a few weeks in any of your clinical jobs. The other thing is what you lose in sort of a placement's worth of clinical experience, you can get in terms of adding to your portfolio in the sense of taster weeks, having days where you go. So I spend the odd day in theatre when I can. And also you have the locum as well, and you have the energy to locum because you're on 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So you can locum outside of those hours as well, if you want. How much autonomy do I have about my project? So we sort of already answered this one. So a lot of it depends on your supervisor. Like Serena mentioned, most supervisors, in my opinion, and from what I've heard from other people, won't necessarily have a project ready to go for you. So you can, yeah, so EBH, there's none. Mine, I didn't meet my supervisor until the day that I turned up, and we just discussed the projects then. The other AFPs that I know right now, one of them had 2 or 3, their supervisor came with 2 or 3 projects ready for them, but they still had the freedom to develop their own projects, which they're doing now as well. So it really depends on your supervisor, and it really depends on what you want to do as well. You shouldn't be afraid to tell your supervisor that you don't necessarily want to do a certain project, or that you're interested in something else in their field or in another field. There's a fair amount of flexibility in most AFP posts to do whatever project you want. Even if it's not directly from your supervisor, you have the time to find other people to do projects with as well within the hospital that you're at. Yeah. Cool. Do I need to, so this is another one from the Google form. So do I need to have a clear research interest or have contact with super already? No, not really. Like I said, I only really met mine on day 1 that I started. And I didn't have a massive idea about exactly what I wanted to do myself in medical education. And I know for some of the research API, and your block is coming up. I don't know if you have contacted your supervisor or have, yeah.
I have contacted him. He hasn't come back to me yet, but yeah. Yeah.
So for the vast majority of people, they actually only really begin their academic stuff at the time their academic block starts. And people often get worried about that, but actually 4 months is a reasonably long time to gain the sort of skills that you're expected to an AFP. So you don't need to have a clear research interest or contact to the supervisor, unless I would say if you definitely know exactly what you want to do, or you definitely know someone in that university or that hospital that you think would be good, then feel free to contact them. There's no harm in doing that at all, but it's not going to add or detract to your application. The only sort of caveat to that is that some deaneries like Oxford, so Oxford's AFP works in the way that you don't have sort of specialties assigned to an AFP necessarily. They just have a list of all the departments, and it's up to you to contact someone from those departments to ask if they'll supervise you. All those people that are on that list have agreed in some format to the fact that they might have an academic F2 in their department, and so they will have projects and they will be motivated to supervise you, but it's just about you going through that list and seeing what they're interested in, etc., and spending some time on that. Whereas I didn't really have to do that for my London application, etc.
Yeah, so for generally, I don't know if where you guys are applying, but generally for London, you don't really have to, have a research in mind. You don't need to contact someone from before. Whereas like Oxford and Cambridge, as Vic said, it's not compulsory, but it's usually a bonus during interviews as well. They kind of ask you if you contacted someone and if you have like a specific project in mind and stuff like that. So it's always a bonus to contact if you're going for Oxford or Cambridge. But for London, it's just so kind of anonymized. You just rank the jobs and then you get, whatever, depending on how well you do in interviews and how much your application scores and stuff like that. So yeah.
Cool. Fine. Another question that we had from the Google form was, do you need to apply for a grant to do research? Not necessarily. The vast majority of people that I know that are doing AFP blocks don't have to apply for a grant. I think this comes from the fact that you have 4 months to do research, and so being realistic, you can't do any sort of massive projects. Like you can't set up an RCT, run an RCT, collect the data, etc., all in 4 months. And those tend to be the types of research that need grants and more funding. So usually you don't need to apply for a grant. It does depend on the type of project, and sometimes supervisors, when you start, will tell you that they have an idea of a project that's a smaller part of a bigger one. So for example, you're doing one small part of an RCT or one small analysis or something, which in itself can be published or whatever, but it's just one part of something that someone else in their team are doing as a whole. And they might ask you to apply for funding for that. But number one, before when you're applying, you don't need to have any ideas about grants or anything like that. If you have a specific idea in mind of like a trial you want to do or something that needs money and funding, I would contact your supervisor when you start as early as possible, like in F1, because the grant and funding things take a while to come through and there's a lot of applicants for these things. So you might need to apply to multiple ones before you're successful. But for 9% of people, I would say that this isn't really an issue and that you don't need to have any sort of money attached to your projects, basically. Okay. So what happens if I get an AFP that I don't want? That's another really common question that we get. So in my opinion, it doesn't really matter too much. I only personally applied to the AFPs that I wanted to take, and that was mostly determined by the specialties attached to the academic block, not necessarily the academic block itself. As I mentioned before, I'd sort of heard from people that the academic block itself was reasonably flexible, and so it wasn't the end of the world to me if I'd got an AFP that I necessarily didn't want. Things like location and the other specialty were more important. Yeah, I don't know what everyone else's experience was of that, but yeah.
Yeah, a few people have asked me this question. Again, I valued doing the AFP a lot more than the jobs attached to it, because I'm not really sure what I'm doing career-wise, but I could see a lot of tangible benefits of doing the AFP. So even though the jobs weren't, even though there were probably FP jobs that maybe sounded a little bit more interesting, I still went with the AFP because it had a lot more perceivable benefit of just the AFP itself. But that's because I didn't have any keen job interests. I didn't want particularly surgery heavy or medicine heavy or anything at the time. So I'm still glad I did it because there's things I get to do that I couldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah, so I was the same with Surina. So I really wanted to do the AFP. So location mattered to me. So I wanted to stay in London. I only applied to London, but then I ranked almost all the jobs. So yeah, I ranked like 100 jobs, I think, and they're like 120. So really, yeah. So this is what I did. Generally, talking to people, there are generally two views on how to approach this. Some people are like big. They only rank, 20, 10, 15, 20 jobs. Only the ones that are very, really, really happy to do, like as a combination, both the clinical jobs and the AFP, the academic theme. Others are more like, us. They really want to do an AFP, no matter what the jobs are, and so I ranked everything, more or less everything. So yeah, it depends on you and what you're really, what you really want to do with this.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you get a job you don't want, you can reject it if it's really not sitting well with you, or
definitely
at that point the jobs are more important to you. So yeah, you can think about that later.
Definitely, and you can always. There were people as well that I know that their AFP is like academic F2s at the moment, and when they got their offer, they weren't really happy with their academic theme, and they emailed the supervisors straight away, actually, the day of their offer, asked them if it's possible to change the project and stuff, and then they even agreed on the same couple of days to change the project, and then they just accepted the job and did another project of their own.
That's cool. Yeah.
So there are ways to get around these things, but yeah, definitely, if you really, really don't like, you can always reject the job in the end. But yeah.
At worst, you have 4 months off to do whatever you want. Of 9 to 5, you could take some holidays.
Yeah, definitely.
But, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. Okay, before I move on to the next section, We're sort of already over halfway through on these questions. Before I go to the application stuff, any questions? Anyone want to shout out questions or anything? Don't be nervous. There's no stupid questions.
It's so nice that there's a small group so we can actually maybe talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's almost better that there's only a few people, because that's the whole point of this session, is just back and forth.
Anybody? Don't worry if it's even like so specific to you, because this is a perfect time to ask. And this is being recorded, so it could help someone else who watches it later.
Yeah.
And you're all anonymous. None of us know you. Okay.
No.
UID.
All right. We'll just crack on. All right. So this is sort of all specific to the application process. Just a few questions again that got asked during our last talk and ones that have been sent in to us. So is there a decile cutoff for X deanery? Don't know, really, is the answer. The only place that we know that publishes a decile cutoff is London. London's decile cutoff is usually between 3rd and 4th decile. You can see it, what it was for the last few years on their application brochure. Other places definitely don't have as high a decile cutoff. People who have gotten interviews and gotten jobs with like 9th decile marks. So other places definitely don't place as much of an emphasis on it. So essentially, we don't know. The only way to really tell is by maybe asking people who were in that deanery what decile they were. But the only place I would say to like be aware of the decile cutoff and not apply if you're clearly out of it would be London. And that's the only time I'll tell anyone to not apply FP, is if you're sort of clearly outside the London cutoff. But yeah.
It's still worth a gamble if the location is important to you. If you're kind of on the boundaries of what the previous cutoffs have been, which is what happened to me, because I wanted to be somewhere close to home. So I was somewhere on their boundaries from the last few years, but unfortunately it was too high. But again, it depends what your sort of priorities are, because location was number one for me. I still went for it. So yeah, it depends on your own personal priorities, basically.
Definitely. If you can't see yourself applying to another deanery, then you might as well. There's no harm. London application especially is just clicking a few buttons and applying. There's no white space questions. So it doesn't take too long to apply. But yeah, essentially if there's another deanery that you're interested in and you're sort of well outside the London cutoff, then I would probably advise not applying there and trying your chances at applying smart somewhere else where you stand a chance at an interview. Cool. So what counts as a point for presentation? So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. You can look at our last talk. But essentially, presentations and poster presentations, it doesn't matter which one it is. They are both worth the same amount of points. Presenting the same thing twice will not give you double the points unless one of the times it was an oral and one of the times it was a poster. If you do the same poster twice, it's still only 1 point. And all your presentations have to be at like a national or international or society level. It can't be an undergraduate society conference or something like that. And these are all sort of excerpts from the London booklet that you can have a look at later. What counts as points for a publication is another one that we get asked all the time. So it has to be a peer-reviewed journal. Peer review just means that when you submit it, 2 people who are considered sort of experts in the field that you've written about will have a look at your article and give you feedback on it. It needs what's called a PubMed ID. So PubMed is the database where all publications are stored. You can type in PubMed on Google at what it looks like. So it needs a PubMed ID, and journals, if in their submission bit, will say whether their articles are indexed on PubMed or not. You can have publications in press, which means that it's been accepted, but it's just not published anywhere yet, or it's not printed. And you'll usually get a number called an NLM ID. So just have a look for that if you've got something that's in the works, but not actually there yet on the PubMed website. The quality of the publication doesn't matter at all. It's literally just a raw number. So it could be the worst publication in the world and just have wrong information about a vaccine causing autism or whatever, and it wouldn't matter. It still counts. But yeah. Is it okay if I have 0 of any of these things? Absolutely. It's obviously helpful, especially in places like London, where they publish a points cutoff in terms of how many of these things to have. But again, like I mentioned earlier, vast majority of applicants won't have any of these things, or maybe just one of these things. Like I said, I think in terms of having one publication, there was about 100 and 150 people of all the final years that applied to the foundation program that had a publication. So yeah, the vast majority of people won't have these things, and different deaneries place different amounts of emphasis. When we did this talk, if you went through our own things, and I think the average between us was probably 1 publication. So yeah, don't worry about that too much. So what can I do to boost my application before the deadline? So there's a lot of things, like I said, not all of this needs to be tangible, but it's stuff that you can write about in your white space questions and stuff that you can talk about at interviews. So you definitely have time to do a lot of teaching still. So you guys will all be in final year, 5th year, etc. So you could teach younger medical students in whatever scenario you like. And again, it might not count for specific points, but it's great to talk about the experience. And the main thing I would say is deliver a session, collect feedback, and then change the session tailored to the feedback, and have that cycle so that you can talk about what you actually changed in your teaching. And that shows sort of growth, learning, etc. And the main thing is to collect evidence. So always get feedback or a certificate or something for your teaching. This is something that no one ever gets told at medical school, but you need it for your portfolio applications. So later on in your careers, when you're applying, you need a certificate or whatever. And when you're applying, you'll be 2-3 years from now. It's difficult to go back to someone who you did teaching 4, 5, 6 years ago and ask for a certificate when they can't remember who you were. So just try and collect the evidence as you go along. The other quick point is you can try and get a quick publication, maybe even now before the application deadline, by writing a letter. So a letter is just a short 500-word response, either to an existing article or just your view on an issue that you feel is important. So before we did our application, Serena and I just wrote a quick letter about a medical student's perspective on sexual history taking. We just finished our Garmin HIV, and we thought the experience wasn't fantastic. And so we just did a quick reflection. We looked up like other techniques that other medical schools had used, and then just wrote a quick 500-word letter. And within about a week or less than a week of submitting it, it had been published, and it helped in terms of getting points for the publication section of our application. So that's something really quickly that you can do. In terms of practically going about doing one, have a look at journals like Medical Education Online or the Clinical Teacher. The medical education journals tend to be a bit more sort of quick turnaround, and they accept a lot more sort of subjective experiential things. So it's easier to get published in, I would say, than most other journals, basically. You can also try and do a case report, but that might take a bit longer than writing a letter. You can see if there are any essay prizes that are still available. So you can look at the RSM website, check your university mailing list, the Royal College website. There are lots of essay prizes from all over the place, and the deadlines are sort of throughout the year. So there could be one that's in the next few weeks that you could apply for quickly and hopefully see if you can get that. And then leadership and management roles. So uni's just starting, so there'll be a lot of societies and stuff starting up again, which you can apply for, or create your own leadership and management role, or be a representative of medical school, etc. Cool. Another question from the Google form was, what is the interview process like? It's quite a broad question, and honestly, okay, we've got a question, sorry. Hi, was your letter that you mentioned peer reviewed? I have a similar publication which is in a peer reviewed journal, but I don't think it was itself peer reviewed. So I actually don't think I was peer reviewed. I don't think so at all, because the turnaround time was like a day. And so I don't think it would have even people would have had time to read it. And we never got any sort of comments on the letter or anything like that, which you normally do if you publish something and get it peer reviewed. So it's a peer-reviewed journal, but I don't think our letter itself was peer-reviewed. I'm not sure why it wasn't. Maybe it was peer-reviewed at a later date, but I would still submit that publication that you've talked about, definitely, if it's in a peer-reviewed journal. What happens when you, oh, sorry.
If it's in a peer-reviewed journal, isn't by definition peer-reviewed?
I know. I would agree as well. Like it should have been, but I remember from when we submitted it, we never got anything back saying that reviewers had been identified or that comments were given. We never had to like change anything; just accepted it. So I don't really know.
Definitely include it in the application. I mean, you never know.
No, if you got something, you just put it down. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's just in general. Always just put, if you're in doubt, as long as you're not like actively lying about something, just put it down. And it's up to them to decide what counts as a point or not. And the way I think Marinos mentioned in the talk before, when we were talking about this, the way they do it is that they literally, somewhat like an admin person sits there, copies and pastes your PubMed ID into PubMed, and then as long as your name is somewhere on that publication, they usually approve the point. I don't think they go into too much more depth than that by looking at the journal, etc., etc.
So also, as a word of caution, it works the other way around. If you've misspelled your name or the PubMed ID by a little bit, they're not going to bother you, just not going to get the marks.
So so be very careful when you're filling out PubMed IDs and stuff
What's
like that.
this? Does Oriel tell you whether your academic achievement counts?
No, I don't think so.
No, the only thing you get, at least for London, is that after you apply, you get like a shortlisting score, what was your score and what was the cutoff, but you only find out once they shortlisted everyone. So it's not really helpful.
Yeah, for the other applications, there wasn't any indication what ended up counting.
No.
Yeah. So when you go to Oriel, there's sort of like 3 columns that you can put, like 3 sections you put stuff in. So for publications, prizes, and presentations, you have 10 blank slots that you then fill in yourself, and you just keep adding your achievements, and then you just submit it. There's no sort of feedback, whatever. So just be very careful with how you type and what you put in, etc. when you're doing it. Okay, the other question, do you guys know anything about the Northwest interviews? I think unfortunately the person who applied to Northwest was Angela, who isn't here right now. But I had a lot of friends that applied to Northwest. It's quite a popular deanery. The interview from hearing about their experiences and over the last sort of year and the last year's applicants, the interview is reasonably similar to London. So they have a clinical station and they have a critical appraisal station. It's very, very similar to London. The only difference was in the clinical station, they apparently also got asked a few personal questions. And a lot of that was actually to do with sort of what their specific achievements were, going into detail with that. And also they did want to know a bit about their research interests. So they said they didn't know what specialties you'd applied for. So they wouldn't know that you'd ranked cardiology highest or whatever, but they expected everyone that I know at that interview to talk about any specific research interest they had, or anyone that they knew in the Northwest Deanery that they could do a project with, for example. That doesn't mean that they had supervised. That just means that they had looked at the research of this person and said, I would be interested in this as well.
Yeah, so I also have a friend who is now an academic. He's an F1 in Manchester, but he's like an AFP who agreed. I texted him earlier today. He agreed to tell me everything about Northwest interviews and also contact the program director because he said that there might be some changes in this year's interviews, but he will contact the program director and ask for more specific details. But he hasn't yet. So we only had a chat this afternoon. If you don't mind texting me when he replies, text us on MedIQ, the messenger bit on our page. And when he replies, I can pass all the information to you, whatever he says to me, really.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. If you want to be put in touch with specific academic doctors, then let us know. Again, ideally on Facebook, so we know who you are and how to contact you, and we can definitely try and make it happen. And when we move on to the interview part of our courses, we'll obviously try and recreate it to suit whatever deaneries you're trying to apply. After we've done the research from our friends and our colleagues of exactly what they had. So it'll definitely be as tailored as possible when we get there. But yeah, let us just reach out on Facebook if you want to talk to someone else.
Yeah, to be fair, I think we answered this question anyway, but also keep your questions coming in the chat. Feel free to interrupt me whenever. But yeah, so in general, the interview process, your application deadline is the 4th of November this year. And then anytime after that, you'll start the interview process. So it goes until early January. Everything will be online. And it's mostly like a panel interview in most places. So it's 2 to 4 interviewers. They're usually all academics who are supervisors of the AFP posts at that deanery. And in general, the interviews are split into a personal segment, so about you, about your white space questions, etc., your interests, a critical appraisal, so they'll give you a study, an abstract, and you'll have some time to read over it, or some deaneries ask you to come prepared with an abstract that you're interested in to talk about, an ethics section, which sometimes is woven into either the critical appraisal or the clinical scenarios, and then the clinical scenarios itself, which are usually just going through like an A to E emergency thing, for specific clinical scenarios, looking at prioritizing clinical scenarios, etc. And all that stuff we're going to have in our main course, sort of detailed sessions, practice interviews, etc. in the weeks to come. So hopefully you'll know more than us by the end of all of this about what the interview process is like. Sorry, go on, Andy. Sorry.
No, I said yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks. How do you find info about the specialties available or choose which from London? So I put the link here and we sent it out in our newsletter, the first newsletter. So all the information about which specialties specifically, which program, which academic blocks and what specialties are attached are all on this PDF file. And there's also an Excel sheet on the London, Kent, Surrey, Sussex website. So if you just type in that or go on our newsletter, you'll be able to see all of the jobs. In London, usually every year, there's like 100 to 150 jobs. Rank as many as you want. There's no tactical way of ranking. So you can't say, oh, this specialty might be more competitive, that specialty might be more competitive. There's no point thinking like that. So just rank as many jobs as you want. The things to think about are the academic block, the location, and the specialties around it, as well as whether you want to be in the same hospital for the first year and the second year, etc. So think more from that perspective. I used like a traffic light system. This is like an actual system, it's just what I called it. Basically my Excel sheet, I dug it up, it looked like this. So I just went through every program and then I put green for the ones that I was like, yes, orange for the ones I was like, maybe if there was something this, and then red for the ones I was like, absolutely not. And all the red ones were either places I didn't want to be or jobs that had like endocrinology and stuff. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I didn't actually end up applying to any of these orange ones either, because I just, for myself personally, figured I didn't want to do them as much. But as Anthony told you before, her experience was different. She just applied for as many and was happy to do almost any AFP. And then the green ones are the ones I applied for pretty much, with the exception of a few that I jiggled around afterwards. But yeah, but I applied for clinical neuroscience. I don't know why. Cool. Make the other point to think, and it's nothing to do right now, but later on, before you sort of get the AFP offers and stuff, try to think about your decisions, about where you would accept and where you might reject and things like that. There's a 48-hour cutoff, so from the moment that you get your offer, you have 48 hours to accept or reject it. And there's not much time to actually sort of think about location, who else is going there, what the current AFP experience is there, etc. So try and already be thinking about these things when you're ranking jobs. Yeah. Another question we got asked: tips for online interviews. We literally have 8 hours worth of content plus on this, so I can't talk about it all in the focus of this one slide. I've had online interviews before. I actually had an online, the mock interview that I had before my AFP was like an online interview. We did it via Skype. And so I practiced my actual AFP interviews like that. And it was exactly the same format, really. It didn't feel a huge amount more different. The bit personally for me when I've done them and talking to other people who've done them, the bit that's most different is the engagement and interaction and the non-verbal cues side of it. The questions they'll ask and the actual format of it and the structure of it will be almost exactly the same as far as we know. Obviously, this is the first year they're doing AFP interviews online, so we can't guarantee things won't change, but as far as I know, everything will be a similar format. My main tips and to think about in terms of online interviews are to remember your non-verbal cues. So one thing that I found quite useful, which makes you sound like a massive loser, but was actually just practicing one or two of my answers in the mirror, so you can see what you look like when you're answering these things, and you can see if you're really miserable, if you're using your hands, if you're maintaining eye contact, things like that. So I found that really useful for developing non-verbal cues. Keep practicing online. So even if you're just setting up a video conversation with yourself on a phone, just keep practicing online so that you know where to look, and that the first time you're not doing it is when you're actually at your interview. Keep it professional, so obviously still wear professional clothes. Don't like yeah, I was gonna say don't risk not wearing trousers, stand up or something. But yeah, keep it professional. It's the same as any other interview. So yeah, and again, like I said, we'll literally talk all of this, and our interview course will be specific and tailored to sort of having online interviews for the most part. Okay. Cool. The last sort of section, because I'll hand over to Serena. She did the white space question talk. If you get bleep, let us know, and we'll take over. But yeah.
Yeah, I think again most things were discussed last week, but just to emphasize them a bit more. So quite a vague question of what to include in white space questions. I think there were some questions last week of, is this too medical? Is this not medical enough? Basically, it doesn't really matter unless the question is very specifically, what medical education have you done? Which is quite unlikely from what I remember. Most of it will just be something vague like, what teaching experience do you have? What research experience do you have? It doesn't have to be all academic, all medical, all to do with your course and things around it. Make sure you diversify, especially if you have lots of different examples, use them. And if you go back to the recording of our last webinar, we talk about these three categories: research, education, leadership and management, which pretty much sort of 90% of the white space questions revolve around. Once you split up everything you've done into these three categories, it's very easy to slot them into all the questions. But the main thing in terms of your planning is to really reflect and link it to the AFP, which we talked about last week. But once you do that, you can't go wrong with these questions. And the more personal and the more varied, the better, is what I would say. So I think someone asked this on the Google Forms about if the white space questions appear again later in interview. Definitely possible. They asked me specifically about my questions in my EBH interview. Something was about, I think one of the questions was, what do you want to do with your EBH AFP? So they asked me to expand on that. So I obviously did look at my white space questions a lot before the interview. So I knew them inside out and I knew what I had said. So I knew which points to expand on in the interview. So yeah, definitely know them, just like with medical school when they could ask you about your personal statement. They might not necessarily, but they can definitely. So be prepared for that. And what else? Yeah, no, that's all really. I've also said you can use this as a chance to sell other things not included. So if by the time the interviews come around, you've done more things, definitely add them into your answers to say, you know, I mentioned I did this project in my white space questions. Since then, I've actually been able to present it, or I've actually been able to write it up. So remember what you've written so you can expand on it if you are able to do that. That will look really, really nice. So yeah, short answer, know your questions well, know your answers well.
Yeah.
And this was from someone asked this on our Google form as well. So do I need to express a specific research or career interest in my white space question and or interview? I think there was a question from one of the deaneries that said, what are your career interests or research interests? And the question is, should I sort of tailor it to that niche? I'd say if you do have a specific niche that you've worked hard to develop and that you genuinely are interested in, then make sure you are authentic in your answers and show that off. Show that you've explored it, show that you have very intentional goals for the future as well. That's a really strong selling point for why you want to do the AFP, because you're demonstrating you've got a specific intention to pursue an academic career. So that's great. Definitely sell that and exploit that as you can. If you're unsure, which I'd say pretty much the majority of people seem to be these days, that's fine. You don't need to have a neurosurgery dream or you want to, whatever. The point of the AFP is it's equipping you with so many skills that you can use regardless of your career choice, and that's the thing you need to cash in on and exploit in your answers. And be honest, because if you're not honest or if you try and feign interest, it'll very much just fall in on itself. If not at the white space question, definitely in your interview when you can't talk about it with any authentic sort of passion. So then talk about all the other things the AFP will bring you and how you can use them in the future, regardless of what your actual career choice ends up being. So that's how I would frame it, because I didn't have any specific interests career-wise or research-wise, and that is how I framed my answers. Was that no matter what I do, this AFP is so valuable, and I know I can use it no matter where I end up. So you can frame both of those things either ways, however it fits with your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I just lied and said I really wanted to do transplant surgery, and just sort of went with that. But anyway.
Yeah, but you had enough backing to show that with your research that you've done. It just happened to all be in transplant.
Yeah, I could lie convincingly,
Yeah.
I guess. But anyway. Okay, there's only a few of you here. We've got like one or two bits left after this, but I was hoping if you guys could just take a minute to fill out the feedback for this talk, that would be really useful. We'll wait for about a minute or so before we go on.
Mm-hmm. And feel free to use the time to ask any questions as well while we're waiting. I can't believe I haven't been bleeped once.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah, I know your ward cover sounds amazing.
Yes.
The link in the chat. Can you do that, Vig?
Yeah, I can try.
Or is your screen sharing? Should I do it?
I can do it.
Oh, okay, fine, yeah. Thank you for filling it in.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to fill it in like 5 or 6 times, then feel free.
It's just there's no visual or audio feedback with this kind of teaching, so it's even more important to actually know what we're doing is being heard by someone through feedback.
And in the form, please feel free to put. Oh, am I muted? Am I muted?
No, you're not muted.
Okay. All right. Geez, Andy. Okay, sorry.
No, I just answered the question.
I'll mute myself.
Go down with you.
Yeah, in the form, just feel free to like ask what you might want from our interview course as well. If you're thinking about doing that, like if we're going to try and tailor it to you guys as much as possible. So yeah. Right, we'll get another 30 seconds. Ask any questions that you have as well.
Mm-hmm.
What time do you finish, Serena?
I finish at 8:30.
Oh, you still have an hour.
Yeah, I mean,
I bet you 8:15 there'll be an EREST.
Stop saying that. Really.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, today's the least amount of wards I've had to cover on ward cover, which has coincided nicely with this, but it's really strange that no one's needed me.
Oh, no worries. You're very welcome. iPad DMPY DCH has said they've done the form, but they have to go. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Okay, we've got a minute or two left. Well, was there anything you guys hoped you knew before your applications? To be fair, literally almost everything that I've said and Serena said and that we're going to be telling you, because at least at UCL where I was, we had basically no information from anyone about what the AFP was, what the applications were, and the only thing that I got was sort of anecdotal information from like the one person or two people that I knew who'd done the AFP. In terms of the actual sort of like take home things that I wish I knew at this stage of the application a bit more about, I think would have been in terms of how to write white space questions and a structure and a format to write them with. When I first did my first draft, it was just sort of like mindless babble. But I think the structure that Serena talked about last week, the STAR structure, if you weren't there, you can have a look at the YouTube video. The STAR structure and actually relating everything to the AFP helped a lot. And I think, I applied to Cambridge, where I think they place a reasonably heavy emphasis on space questions. So that ended up being quite important for me to find out.
Yeah, I can't think of anything specific for me. Agree, obviously everything we've talked about. We found out all quite haphazardly and bits and bobs from everywhere. So it would have been nice to have it all in one place, I guess. But I think the most important thing you can do is to talk to people who are where you want to be, so where you're applying. Obviously, this is a great place to ask us, but we can only offer our own experiences, which is why we've already spoken about reaching out to us, so you can talk to someone who is where you are. Yeah, just make sure you're fully informed for what you're applying, because I can imagine, for example, if you're applying to EVH and expecting it to be very, very organized and sort of spoon-fed, then you'll be disappointed. Similarly, if you're hoping to be really, really independent and you find out there's no maneuvering with the projects, then you'll be disappointed there. So just make sure you understand the deanery you're applying to, because it's a lot of work you're putting in for these questions and interviews. If you then get there and don't even like it, it'll be such a shame. So yeah, just research your specific aspirations properly.
No, yeah, you guys said everything. I agree with both of them. Yeah, so just all of these bits and pieces that we didn't really know. We had to find from with anecdotal. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe the only other thing, because I'm doing my block now, the only other was that maybe I didn't know much about was literally how much you can actually do in this time. There's so much stuff that I never thought I'd be doing. I before I came into this AFP, before I started this blog, I thought it was, I'll just do a research project 9 to 5 every day. I didn't really know what that research project was or what the specifics of the research were. I thought maybe it was just like data collecting and stuff. So I guess what we've described to you when we've talked to you guys about like what our days are like, how much teaching there is, how much leadership roles there are, all the individual parts of the research stuff that you'll be doing. I wish I'd known a bit more about that, not because it would have necessarily maybe helped me in my application, but just so I'd known what the hell I was going to be doing for 4 months. Because literally until I was like 2 to 3 weeks into my block, I was like, what am I doing? I had no idea. That might be just the nature of where I am, not being like proactive in finding out, etc. But yeah, it's something that hopefully you guys are more educated about now, having listened to us. But yeah, cool. So I've been through this slide a fair few times already, but just the next steps to consider in the next few weeks is what types of AFP you want to do, what other blocks there are, what deanery you want to be in. Don't worry too much about the pay, it's not a huge difference, and you can look at the main thing is prior trainees experience. So again, like Serena said, that's us. We've all been through the application process, and the application process for most deaneries is almost exactly the same. so you can talk to us about any woes or worries you have. But yeah, talk to people in your deanery or you're applying to as much as you can. We can help put you in touch, or otherwise another good way to get in touch with people is to email the hospital postgraduate medical education team. All those emails are usually available either from the deanery website or from the hospital website. And so you can ask them to put you in touch with the current AFP in that block. Your next steps will be to have a look at our newsletters and stuff, have a read of all the jobs and where they are, try and start ranking places, start writing your white space questions. And interview prep is still very far off, so don't worry too much about that. You've still got months to go before that, and there's plenty of time for it. So yeah, the main things now are to sort of ranking jobs and start formulating your white space questions, and the structure and methods that Serena talked about last week will help with that. Again, just to reiterate what we said every week about who we are and what we're doing. So we finished this sort of first 4-week block of this free introductory course where you hopefully learn a fair bit about the AFP and about us. Not next week, but the week afterwards, or around about then, we'll be starting our full interview preparation course. And as part of that, you'll have sort of 7-8 interviews, 7-8 webinars about the interview process specifically. So we've listed them all here. So there's going to be critical appraisal, with specifically critical appraisal for the deanery that you're applying to and how to do that in an online interview, clinical scenarios, statistics sessions, which are really important, and we'll package up all the statistics that you need to know for the AFP, and not only tell you about what they are, but how to actually describe them and how to apply them to your critical appraisal. And then we've talked about ethics and law, and again, not just what is ethics and law, but how do you actually apply that to your interview and how do you answer it in a way that makes you stand out. We'll be offering some one-to-one mock interviews as well, which we think is like reasonably unique to us, and hopefully we'll be able to tailor the interviews to the places that you're applying. And then we'll be having some more of these Q&A sessions just throughout the process where you can ask us questions, and obviously you'll be free to message us or whatever at any point during that. For that entire sort of package, we are asking for a small fee of about £30 or £5 per webinar. Hopefully you can see that this is worth it. It's a fair bit of stuff to get for that amount of money, and it's mainly to cover the costs of Zoom and our website hire and stuff. When you think about it, if you were to go to a course in person, which you can't really do anymore, that would be the cost of a sort of return bus journey wherever you are, essentially. But we'll be giving you personalized and supported content. The actual, we'll be sending out an email the next week about how to sign up to that as well. Thing to mention is we've just started our white space question checking service, and a few people have already sent in their drafts. So we'll be able to review one draft per person. Please just email us with your name, deanery, and the subject heading saying it's a white space question. Try and email as early as possible. Obviously, you're still a while from the deadline of the application, but just so that we can get to them and have a look at them and give you as useful feedback as we can, try and email as early as possible, because we might take a few days to look at them and reply, ask for advice from friends who are at their deanery, etc., etc. So yeah, please do that. It's completely free, so we're offering this outside of sort of the paid course. So tell your friends, tell whoever, if they want. We won't be writing anything for you, obviously, because it's not our action. So you'll have to sort of have fully written answers before you send them to us. But we can give you suggestions about what's good, what's bad, and help you find areas to bulk it out or cut down words, etc., which I think is probably the most useful way that it can be for that. Cool. So that's the end of the talk. And any questions that you want to ask still? We'll stick around for a few more minutes.
Just keep an eye on all our social media for the next week, 10 days, where you'll find out everything about what's to come and how to get involved. Because we're not having a webinar next week, we're just using that time to give us time to reply to white space questions and give you time to write them before we start moving on to the interview phase. So yeah, all the communication will be through social media from here on. Cool.
All right.
Thanks for joining. Any other questions?
Thank you.
No problem.
That's all right. No problem. I hope it's useful.
Cool.
Cool. Should we stop the recording here?
Yeah. Marina, how do I stop?
Stop.
Fine. Yes.
Sweet.